As we continue to move towards Halloween ends, it's now time to review the seventh movie in the Halloween franchise. That's 1998's Halloween H20, 20 years later. This is a pretty good movie in the series, and it's a very important one in the franchise as this movie brings about the first timeline deviation. This movie picks up 20 years after Halloween Night 1978, which encompassed the first two movies. So this movie does acknowledge both parts 1 and part 2, but everything else after that is ignored. Parts 4, 5, and 6 are out. There is no Jamie Lloyd, there is no Cult of Thorn, just Michael Myers coming back 20 years later to pick up where he left off. He's found his sister, and it's time to try to finish what he started. I like that. I like that this movie simplifies things a little bit. It's just back to Michael out on a mission, no overcomplications. As always, if you haven't seen this movie, please be aware that this review will contain spoilers. So as this movie begins, the Mr. Sandman song is playing in the background, and for me, I find that song very fitting for this movie series. It was introduced in the second movie and returns in this one. I just find it a interesting and fun addition. The movie starts with Nurse Marion arriving at her house. Now, Nurse Marion is the nurse from the original Halloween movie who's going with Dr. Loomis to Smith's Grove to pick up Michael. She also returned in part two, and she's the nurse who told Dr. Loomis that Laurie Strode is Michael's sister. So she's arriving home and she notices that her front porch light is broken, and she thinks that her house has been broken into. She goes next door and finds her neighbor Jimmy and his friend is there. They call the police. They say they'll be there in about 15 minutes, but Jimmy decides to go take a look around the house in the meantime. He has a look around, doesn't see anything, notices that her office has been trashed. He trashes the kitchen a little bit when he gets scared and steals a couple of beers and heads out and goes back to his house. Nurse Marion goes inside. The police haven't arrived yet, and she notices that the office has indeed been trashed and the power's out in the house. Of course it is. She goes and sees the front door is open, goes to check. We then see Michael Myers is in the house, standing in the background. She closes the door, turns around, sees the back door is now open, so she's nervous. She makes a smart choice and runs out of the house, heads back to the neighbor's house, lets herself in, and this is where trouble begins because she finds that Jimmy is dead. He has a ice skate, implanted into his face. She goes towards the back door, opens it up, and the friend is there. He stumbles in, he's been stabbed in the back, and then she sees Michael come in. She attempts to make a run for it and gets into a fight with Michael and's trying to fight her way free. She sees the police and the arriving at her house, and she tries to go and get their attention while still trying to fight off Michael. The police go inside her house. She manages to break open the window and try to yell for help, but Michael grabs her and cuts her throat. The important thing to note here is that when she was in her house before she ran out, in the office, we see a picture of Dr. Loomis, and then we see a file labeled Laurie Strode, and it is empty, and we assume that Michael has now found the information he needs and knows where Laurie Strode is. And then, as the police do notice that the house next door has also been broken into, we see Michael pull away in a car, again demonstrating his ability to drive. I guess he's been practicing over the years, although he was plenty capable of driving back in 1978. The next day, as police are investigating the crime scene, they note that this was Dr. Loomis's house and the nurse was there taking care of him. They note that Dr. Loomis has passed away a few years ago, and they discuss how he was on a mission to try to locate Michael Myers. Inside the house, we see an office dedicated to that search. We see that Dr. Loomis had spent his entire life obsessing over Michael Myers and trying to find him. We do know that this timeline does now have one consistency, and that's that both Michael and Dr. Loomis did survive the fiery ending of Halloween 2. The detective does note that he thinks he should call Haddonfield and give them a warning, seeing as this could be Michael Myers related, and It is Halloween after all. However, what they don't know is that Michael now knows where Laurie Strode is, so he's not headed back to Haddonfield. This is the first movie where we get a different setting. He is headed off to California. So we arrive at Halloween Day 1998 and we catch up with Laurie Strode, or as she now goes by, Carrie Tate. As we learned from an article in Dr. Loomis's office, she had faked her death and moved to Northern California under the assumed identity of Carrie Tate so that she could go into hiding. She became a teacher and headmaster at a private school, and she has a son named John who is 17 years old and a student at the school. We pick up with her having a nightmare about Michael and her son waking her up and helping her and getting her medication. The next morning, in the morning, they're having a discussion over breakfast. He wants to go on a school trip, and she is decided not to allow him to go. He feels frustrated because he needs some independence, but she's nervous about letting him go anywhere off on his own, that she's not watching out for him. As he goes to start his day at school, he catches up with his friends, and the group of them all decide that if they're all not going on the school trip, they'll stay behind and find a way to have some fun of their own. So they begin to make plans towards that. We then do see Michael making his way towards California. The car he stole has a busted tire and he stops at a rest stop. He waits for a car to stop, and a mother and daughter do stop when they go in to use the bathroom. Michael doesn't harm them. He steals her purse, steals her keys, it steals their vehicle, and continues his journey towards Northern California. John Tate begins trying to make his plans to celebrate Halloween with his girlfriend. He wants to sneak off campus so that he can go and buy her a gift, as that's what he says anyway, and he convinces the guard to let him sneak out. Meanwhile, his mother and the guidance counselor who she's having a relationship with have gone to have lunch in town. So, as they're walking about town and begin to head back, they get caught by the mother, and she's very angry that they've left school without permission, particularly at the son, because she says it's Halloween Day. You have to give her this one day and try to keep yourself safe. She's worried about him just walking around. She keeps thinking she sees Michael in reflections and things just popping up on this day because she's been waiting for him to come back for her. He notes that he's very frustrated with the whole situation. He says that he can't be responsible for her and he can't live in fear of her dead brother because he believes Michael to be dead, although, as it's been noted both by the police and by Laurie Strode, that no body was ever fully found of Michael. As they head back to the school, we see that Michael was in town already. He's there in the vehicle that he stole, and he was watching them on the street. He follows them back to the school and pulls up behind them at the gate as they have the guard let them in, and Laurie admonishes the guard for having let the students leave the campus without permission, and Michael drives on. They're in class, and John's girlfriend sees Michael staring in a gate outside, perhaps scouting out the location. Now, Lori has decided to give her son permission to go on the trip at the end of class. However, since his friends and his girlfriend are staying behind now, he decides to stay behind as well. The buses leave and Michael arrives. He pulls up to the gate. The guard opens the gate and sees the empty car, and Michael just walks right behind him onto the campus. He comes back in, closes the gate, and he's kind of stalking the guard inside the gate, and Michael at this point takes out the phones. Lori is headed out of her office and headed back, and she thinks she sees Michael, and she does, but then her boyfriend walks up, Will, and says he wants to see her tonight after he checks on the students who stayed behind from the trip. She heads on. He sees Michael walk through the bushes briefly, but is not quite sure who it is and just ignores it. All the kids that are remain behind, John, Charlie, and the two girls, head to their rendezvous point to begin their little private party. Lori and Will meet back at her house, and she tells him her history, that she's Laurie Strode, that her brother is Michael Myers, and everything that happened. She notes that she was 17 at the time. This time's to give her an epiphany that her son's now 17. I don't know if this would trigger Michael, but he is back now 20 years later when this is happening. She tries to get hold of her son and she realizes the phones are down as well. And then she sees that his bags are still there and that he did not leave. So she decides to go looking for him. She grabs a gun that was under her pillow for safety and heads out. They bump into the guard at the door who knows that there was a creepy car out front and that the phones are dead. She said she's going to go look for the kids and tells him to try to get the phones back up and running. So this is where Michael really starts to get to work. He goes to the building that John, Sarah, Molly, and Charlie are having their party in, and he starts to systematically take them apart. Charlie separates from the group to go to the kitchen to find a corkscrew. He does find one, but Michael finds him and kills him by cutting his throat open. Sarah comes looking for Charlie and she finds him dead in the dumbwaiter. And then she sees Michael. She jumps in the dumbwaiter to go up to try to get away from Michael. And she goes all the way up. And then her leg gets stuck as she's trying to get out. And Michael cuts the rope and the dumbwaiter falls, smashing her leg. Her leg is very wounded and she's trying to crawl away. But Michael comes up to the next floor, comes up and stabs her to death next. So John and Molly go looking for their two friends. They find a blood trail and follow it, and they find Sarah strung up from a light bulb and is being shocked, but she's already dead at this point, of course. They then see Michael and they take off running, trying to get away. They're on a path, and Michael does catch up to them, and they get into a fight. He stabs John in the leg once, and then Molly manages to hit him and get him down for a moment, and they continue to run. They get back to the dorm entrance and open the outer gate, get inside, and then she drops her keys. She's trying to reach them as Michael reaches the gate and starts trying to slash them through it. Michael then notices the keys and grabs them and uses them to try to open the outer gate. Just as he does find the right key and it's getting the gate open, Laurie Strode and Will arrive at the inner door and let John and Molly inside, and then we get the face-off moment between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers seeing each other for the first time since face to face since Halloween 1978. Will asks who that was when they're inside, and she says that that's her brother, and all they can do now is try to stay alive. She tells John and Molly to hide in a closet, and her and Will head down the hall. She tells him to try to get away, but he says he's not going to leave her. They see someone coming around the corner, and he grabs her gun and fires a few shots, and this turns out to have been the security guard. He's down and bleeding, and as Will's checking on him, Michael does enter the hallway and kills Will by stabbing him in the back, lifting him off the ground. He then begins to pursue Laurie. She knocks him down through a door, and then she goes down the hallway. Michael's slowly getting up, and she gets John and Molly out, and they flee down outside to her car. They get in her car just as Michael approaches, and she guns it down to the gate. She then tells them to leave and go to the next door neighbors and call the police. She uses her line that she uses a lot in this movies, and that's do as I say. She sends them on their way and smashes the control panel to the gate so it'll remain closed, and then she grabs a fireman's axe. She then walks back onto the campus yelling for Michael. She's had enough. She's decided to face him head on. She walks into the school, and it seems Michael has laid a trap of his own. He has raised himself one handed by a pipe up towards the ceiling. When she walks underneath, he lowers himself down. They get into a fight. She hits him with the axe, and he hits her with his knife in the same arm that was wounded by him in the original movie. She flees into the cafeteria and hides under a table. Michael's on top of the table and starts slashing down whenever she tries to move. And so they play a game of cat and mouse here until Michael gets frustrated and just starts flipping all the tables. They continue to scuffle, and she stabs him with a flagpole and runs up the stairs. Michael pursues and follows her upstairs, walking down the hall, and she pops out with multiple knives, stabbing Michael over and over until he falls over a railing and falls through a table. And Michael is laying prone on the table at the bottom, apparently unconscious. She reaches the bottom and grabs a knife and is about to try to stab him again to finish this when the guard who had survived being shot pops up, tells her he's dead, and pulls her away as they head out. The police have arrived and the ambulances, and we see everybody being treated and tended to. As they are loading Michael's body into the coroner's van, Laurie decides this isn't enough. She doesn't believe that he's dead, so she grabs a weapon, tells them to load him in, grabs the axe, throws it in the van, steals the van, and drives it off campus. And she's speedily driving down away from the school. Michael does start to stir and opens the body bag that he's in and starts crawling towards the front as she slams on the brakes, launching him through the windshield. She then says, "Get up," and he eventually does sit up and stand up, and then she rams him with the van and off of a cliff. It rolls downhill. She's eventually thrown clear of the van. Michael is pinned up against a log, and the van slams up against him, so he is pinned between the van and a log. Lori goes down, she finds the axe, and she stands in front of him. She calls his name a few times, and he looks at her and reaches out his hand. She reaches her hand towards his, and seems like she feels remorseful or upset about this, but she knows what she has to do, and she does. She takes a swing of the axe and decapitates Michael, killing him to end this whole thing that they've been under as we hear sirens growing in the distance. So, what this movie does that I really like is it really does get back to a more simple, basic story. They don't try to overcomplicate things as the fifth and sixth movies did. It just goes back to Michael trying to kill his sister, something he failed to accomplish in 1978. It's 20 years later, 1998, and he's back to try again. We don't know that he knows that she had a son, so we don't know that he's here to kill him as well, although if he knew about him, he probably would, and at this point, he does know about him now. We don't know where Michael's been for 20 years. We don't know what he's been doing, why he's been waiting, or what triggered him to come back now. And I like that. I like in a Michael Myers movie that there's a little bit of vagueness. We don't need to know those details. We just know that this is the year on Halloween, yet again, that Michael has chosen to return and to come back and try to finish what he started really all the way back in 1963 when he killed his first sister. He's had some goals in mind, and he's going to keep coming back until those goals are accomplished. I do like that the beginning of the movie gets to pay a little bit of tribute to Donald Pleasence and Dr. Samuel Loomis. We get the recordings of him explaining his history with Michael, and at the end of the credits of the movie, there's actually a dedication to Donald Pleasence. This movie was dedicated in memory of Donald Pleasence, like Part 6 was before it. So I like that a lot. We also see that Michael had gone to locate Dr. Loomis first, which was probably easier to do. He located Dr. Loomis because he knew he would be able to steer him towards Laurie Strode. And I do like the version of Laurie Strode that we get into this movie. She went into hiding. She's been living in fear for 20 years, but when come face to face, she was ready to face Michael and do whatever she had to do to take him down. It's just a shame what they do in the following movie to bring Michael back. Now, I didn't want Michael to die, of course, but it's kind of a cop out that after all this and she finally gets her chance of revenge, it's somehow revealed that this wasn't Michael Myers in the mask, but we'll get to that in the next movie. One minor criticism is that in other movies, we usually see where Michael gets his gear, like he in multiple movies killed a mechanic to get a blue jumpsuit, and he would get his mask from a Halloween store or something of that nature. In this movie, he just shows up ready to go. He has his suit, he has his mask, and he's just ready for business. Not really a problem, just a note. So let's discuss Michael's mask. It does appear that he wears multiple masks in this movie because it doesn't look consistently the same throughout the movie. In the opening scene, his mask looked almost like the mask from Part 6. It had the traditional slicked back hair and the intense features, But when the movie changes after this scene, it seems like the mask changes as well. And I call this more of like 90s Michael Myers because the mask just has a different facial expression, not quite as intense as the previous mask. This mask also had a bit of a wilder hairstyle. Instead of being slicked backwards, it was kind of going all over the place. But not too off from the original mask either, other than the fact that the eye holes are cut too big. This at times works and at times doesn't, because I kind of like that you can see Michael beneath the mask a bit, but at times you see too much, you can see too much of his face, and a problem it creates is that, as Dr. Loomis always described it, Michael has the darkest eyes, the devil's eyes, and several times in this movie, when you see his eyes close, he clearly has blue eyes. Now, it's also worth noting that Laurie Strode appears to have blue eyes too, so that shows their sibling connection, similar eye color, but it just doesn't fit for Michael Myers. And in the end, I wish they had been consistent and just stuck with one mask throughout the entire film. For Michael's kill count in this movie, it tones it down, but it's more along the levels of the original two movies. And in this movie, Michael kills a total of 6 people. First, he kills Jimmy next door to Nurse Marion. He stabs him in the face with an ice skate. He then kills his friend Tony by stabbing him in the back with a kitchen knife. And then he kills Nurse Marion by cutting her throat. Next, at the school, he kills Charlie by cutting his throat. He kills Sarah by stabbing her several times. And finally, he kills Will by stabbing him in the back with a knife, giving Michael a total of 6 kills for this movie. And then we get one final kill, and that's presumably Laurie Strode killing Michael. Although, as it turns out, that's not who it is. This movie, while not the best received by critics and audiences, was the best received one for many movies, so it was a jump up compared to some of the sequels leading up to this. On Rotten Tomatoes, it gets a 52% score from critics, which is technically a rotten score, and then from audiences, it gets a 49%. Over on IMDb, it gets a 5.8. Now, my personal score is a bit higher for this one. I score this movie at a 8 out of 10. I've always enjoyed this one in the franchise. I always enjoy watching it. And for me, it might be a little biased because this was the second movie in the franchise I saw. I had seen the original John Carpenter's Halloween as a kid, and then I saw this one when it came out in 1998. So I give it a very high score of an 8. So I am 7 movies into these reviews and 6 to go, including Halloween Ends, which comes out October 14th. I am very excited moving forward in these reviews. I hope you enjoyed this one. Please leave your comments on Halloween H20, and please be sure to like and subscribe. And please be sure to keep an eye out for the next video coming soon, which will be the review for 2002's Halloween Resurrection.